Cadaver follows a family who, after surviving a nuclear disaster, accept an invitation to a mysterious event at a hotel, which takes a dark turn when people start to disappear. Beneath the surface of the piece is a perfect metaphor for the pressures of the modern workplace and the rather sinister practices of late-stage capitalism. The narrative exposes the harm which is caused by blind obedience to authority within power structures, the performative nature of labour in the 21st century, and the interpassivity which it could be argued texts like Cadaver encourage.
All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts.
In the final days of the Soviet Union, writer Alexei Yurchak believed that the USSR had become a large stage, and all of the citizens merely actors playing the parts of what they thought represented their role within the state. In some way, this make-believe that the country collectively engaged in allowed for the pretense of a functional society. Yurchak named this phenomenon hypernormalization. Although Yurchak coined the word to explicitly discuss the unique experience of late socialism, it has been reappropriated by Adam Curtis to explore the Western world today in his documentary of the same name. In the piece, Curtis argues that there are two worlds of the 21st century: a frightening and complicated real world, and a much simpler fake world, which has been created to hide the actual one. Without the benevolence of corporations running this fake world, and the order that the politicians inject into it, we would be cast out into the real world, where we would no doubt perish. In order for this facade to be upheld, we need to become like the populace of the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 1980s, and play the parts we are given in order to keep this veneer of the fake world in place. In Cadaver, we see the clear distinction between these two worlds that Curtis discusses. There is the real world outside of the hotel, which directly showcases its horrors with streets full of corpses and a never-ending search for basic needs. Then there is the fake world that showman Matthias has built within the hotel, which offers stability and security, deliberately cloaking the horrors that are contained within it away from the participants. This space is only able to exist because those who are employed to entertain the guests at the hotel perform the parts that they have been cast as. Matthias even explicitly mentions that the actors must make their performances as compelling as possible, so that the guests lose themselves in the narrative world that he has created.
It was so hard not to laugh.
Go ahead and laugh. What's the difference?
Well,
See what he does to you? You can't laugh. You have to sit there and take this stuff seriously. Give yourself and the audience a break. Would you? I mean, are we to assume that really is an extension of the mentality? It is, isn't it? Come on, be honest. It's that corporate come on, we're sort of out there in the valley kind of mentality, isn't it?
There's no doubt about it.
I know it.
They may call it rock and roll, but it's corporate America.
That's right. It's push the button, pull the chain, out comes the little brown choo-choo train.
Alan Bryman notes in his text, The Disneyization of Society, that the performative quality of 21st century labour is the effective combination of emotional and aesthetic labour. As an employee who works within a Disneyized corporation, you are expected to fulfil your role both within the traditional sense, but also to simulate the role prescribed to you by your employer. You must present the successful execution of this particular labour process, one which is underpinned by the ability to look, sound, and feel right, both in the eyes of the employers and the customers, by putting on an emotionally and more generally aesthetically pleasing show of the process that you are performing. It can be assumed at the beginning of Cadaver that the actors who are working at the hotel do not fully understand the reality being hidden from them by the fake world, and they willingly follow the orders from Matthias. In this, they are showcasing the findings from one of the more famous studies into conformity in the Western world. In July 1961, Stanley Milgram, a psychologist at Yale University, conducted an experiment which focused on the conflict between obedience to authority and personal conscience. In it, he had participants think that they were administering increasingly severe electric shocks to what they believed was another participant in the study. The person receiving the shocks began to slowly cry out in pain, then begged for mercy, before eventually falling silent, simulating their collapse or even death. If a participant resisted in administering the shocks, they were prompted by one of Milgram's team, who would encourage them to return to their task. Milgram found that 65% of all participants continued on to deliver the highest level of 450 volts, with all participants continuing to 300 volts. From this, Milgram concluded that obedience to authority, even if it was unjust, is ingrained in us through our upbringing. As he states in his article, The Perils of Obedience, the extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority constitutes the chief finding of the study, and the fact most urgently demanding explanation. However, in subsequent variations of the experiment, it was found that the more aware the participant became of the harm they were doing to the person they were administering the shocks to, the less likely they were to complete the course of electrocutions. This can be seen in Cadaver, where in the action of exposing the actors to the harm they are actually doing, and the truth of the real world, our protagonist destroys all hope of future obedience to Matthias. If we further the allegory, she has unpicked the fake world of the hotel, and exposed the harsh reality to those who are simply duped into exploiting the naive proletarian labour who arrive at the hotel simply wishing for a meal. It is of interest to note that everyone within the hotel feeds on the same source of lumpen proletariat, who within the narrative are unable to awaken themselves from false consciousness, and thus are only good to be turned into meat which sustains the crop that comes behind them. With Matthias seemingly defeated, or at least weakened in some way, the symbolic revolution is completed, the cycle broken, and seemingly the means of production seized. The world can then be reshaped in the image of providing a better tomorrow. However, the final act of the piece is where its greatest commentary lies.
Does anyone know what the London protesters are trying to achieve?
Well, the overthrow of the corrupt city system as they see it, one suspects, no?
They tweet about it regularly on their iPhones, perhaps in between getting cafe lattes and housing themselves in some very fancy tents. But they are against capitalism, except for the lattes.
In the final shot of the film, our protagonist returns to the real world. However, she allows herself to turn back to the hotel, seeing that it is the only light fighting through the bleakness of the world around it, and despite her actions, still endures. She was previously offered a part to play within the hotel due to her superior ability to perform as an actor, but she turned this down with her unable to reconcile her morals with the knowledge that she had and the harm that she would do in accepting it. However, it could be argued that she regrets this decision, with her being cast back into the reality of the world where there is little certainty that she and her daughter will survive. As Slavoj Žižek says, global capitalism is simply accepted as a fact that you cannot do anything about. The only question is, will you accommodate yourself to it, or will you be dismissed and excluded? Though the ending also offers us in the audience our own realisation and the guilt associated with it. We are secretly always glad of the continuation of the status quo, as it allows for us the security and stability of living within the hotel of Cadaver. Films which confront the system in place force us into a state of what Robert Fowler has called interpassivity, in that it performs our anti-capitalism for us, so that we are allowed to continue to engage in the elements of it that we enjoy, rather than feeling shame for perpetuating the ideology. The ending of Cadaver hints towards our desire, as our protagonist's is, to be absorbed back into the fake world, where things are not as complicated, despite our understanding of the inherent suffering which is hidden within it. We have all been invited to stay in the hotel. In fact, we are all permanent residents there.